What is limerence? Have you ever found yourself thinking about someone, not because you chose to, but because your mind simply won't let go? Not a passing thought, a constant thought, an intrusive thought, an obsessive thought, the kind that shows up uninvited in the middle of your day, that replaces conversations you've already had, that turns ordinary moments into something you examine over and over, searching for meaning. Why did he say that? Maybe he knew that about me. Maybe this is what he meant. If that sounds familiar, you may have experienced or are currently experiencing something known as limerence. Limerence is not a word most people know, but the experience itself is one of the most deeply human things there is. It's that state of intense, involuntary preoccupation with another person, where your thoughts keep returning to them no matter how much you'd rather they didn't, where you feel a desperate, almost painful need to know whether they feel anything in return. Today, we'll talk about limerence, what it is, how it works in the brain, who it tends to affect, and what it can quietly cost, and most importantly, how to navigate your way through it. Sorry to tell you this isn't a video about romance, it's a video about the mind and about understanding yourself with a little more clarity and a lot more compassion. The term was coined in the 1970s by a psychologist named Dorothy Tanoff, who interviewed hundreds of people about their experience of intense romantic longing. What she found wasn't just infatuation or a crush. It wasn't just love. It was something distinct, something that had its own shape, its own symptoms, and its own particular kind of suffering. Limerence is an involuntary, obsessive attachment to another person. It's known as the limerent object. It's characterized by intrusive thinking, by an almost constant, low-level preoccupation that you can't turn off, by the desperate, aching need to know that they feel something too, that the feeling is returned, and that last part is crucial. It's not just that you want them, it's that you need reciprocation. The uncertainty is what feeds this loop, unfortunately. The almost, the maybes, the not quite knowing. That's where limerence lives and breathes. Here's what makes it different from a normal crush. A crush fades. You meet someone new, or time passes, or you simply move on. Limerence, it's not like that. It doesn't fade that easily. It clings on. It can last for months, it can last for years. It can survive logic, survive distance, survive even knowing rationally that this person is wrong for you, or unavailable, or simply uninterested. It's not a choice, and that's the thing people don't say often enough. You didn't choose this, your brain chose it for you. And your brain, at least for a while, is not going to let it go. The intrusive thoughts come in at 3 a.m. They come in the middle of a conversation with someone else. They come in where you're supposed to be working, when you're supposed to be present. When you're standing in a grocery store trying to remember why you came in, and somehow you're thinking about them again. You analyze everything. A text message gets read 15 times. A look across the room becomes something you turn over and examine for days. You construct whole narratives from the smallest gestures because your mind is trying desperately to find evidence of what it means to be true. Researchers and therapists have started to notice a pattern. Limerence shows up more frequently and more intensely in people whose brains already have a complicated relationship with letting go of thoughts. People with OCD understand this in a particular way. The OCD mind is a looping mind. It grabs onto something and circles over and over, looking for a resolution that never quite comes. For some people with OCD, limerence becomes that loop. The limerent object is the thing that the brain can't stop returning to. Not because they chose it, but because the brain's mechanism for releasing intrusive thoughts is already compromised. It can also happen for people with ADHD. It's a different but equally powerful pill. The ADHD brain is constantly, restlessly searching for stimulation, for something that cuts through the static and makes everything feel vivid and alive. An obsessive longing, fantasies, daydreaming, it delivers. The highs of limerence, the hopes, the almosts, the possibilities, lights up the brain in a way that the ordinary stable life often doesn't. It becomes its own kind of self-medication. None of this means everyone who experiences limerence has OCD or ADHD, but it does mean that if you've ever wondered why you can't just stop, why logic and willpower and talking yourself out of it doesn't seem to work, There may be something deeper in the wiring that deserves compassion rather than criticism. This isn't a character flaw, it's neuroscience. Limerence gets talked about mostly as a woman's experience, and there's some truth to that. Women reported more often, seeking out language for it more often, and are more likely to name what they're going through. But men live inside limerence too, often in silence, often with no framework for what's happening, no word for it, no conversation about it, no permission to admit that they've been derailed by feelings they can't control. The experience may look different on the outside. Men are sometimes more likely to try to externalize it, to chase it, to act on it, to try to resolve the uncertainty rather than sit inside it. And if they get rejected, they get rejected. They move on. They find another limerent object. But the internal landscape, the obsessive thought, the patterns, the cravings, the reciprocation, the way one person can take up the whole field of vision, that part is shared by both genders. Limerence doesn't ask for your gender or your age or whether you thought you were just past this kind of thing. It shows up when it shows up, and it tends to arrive in the gaps, in the moments when something in your life feels unfinished or lonely or not quite enough. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Limerence doesn't stay contained. It's not a secret you keep that leaves everything else intact. It bleeds. The real relationship, the partner who's actually there, your husband, who knows your morning moods, who shows up for the ordinary Tuesdays of your life, starts to feel somehow insufficient. Not because they are, but because nothing real can compete with something imagined. Reality has friction, fantasy doesn't. Fantasy is always perfectly timed, always says the right things, is always exactly what you needed. Marriages have fractured this way, not from physical affairs, from emotional ones that never even fully happened. From someone spending years half present, half somewhere else, slowly withdrawing from a real life in favor of a feeling that was never fully real to begin with. And then there's the question of the limerent object themselves. Most of the time, they genuinely don't know. Poor souls, unaware souls, they're just living their life, unaware that they have become someone else's entire emotional center. How unfair to them. But sometimes, and this is uncomfortable to sit with, sometimes, however, they do know. They do know. And sometimes, whether consciously or not, they feed it. A message at an odd hour. Warmth that doesn't quite commit to anything. Enough closeness to keep hope alive, and not enough to resolve the uncertainty. It can be cruelty disguised as kindness, or it can be someone who is simply confused themselves. It could be someone who's also limerent themselves. When two limerent people get together, it can be really disastrous. Someone who enjoys the feeling of being wanted and hasn't examined what they're doing. Either way, it keeps you on the hook, and the hook is not a comfortable place to live. So how do you get out? The honest answer is slowly, imperfectly, and not by deciding to stop. Willpower alone doesn't work on limerence because limerence isn't a conscious choice. You can't think your way out of a feeling that lives below thought. What you can do is change the conditions that keep it alive. The most well-supported approach is something called contact deprivation, removing as much as possible the sources of new information about this person. No checking their social media, no finding reasons to be in the same place, no rereading old messages. Every new piece of information is fuel. Your brain takes it and builds with it. It can get back into the loop for months if new pieces of information are revealed. Starve the building process, and eventually, slowly, the structure starts to lose its hold. This is genuinely hard. It can feel like grief because in some ways it is. You are mourning a relationship that technically never existed, but that felt more vivid and real than a lot of things that did. The second piece is redirection, not just away from something, but towards something. Towards the relationships that are actually in your life. Towards the things that make you feel genuinely present, capable, and real. Your relationship with God, your relationship with your friends and family, your relationship with your children. Limerence thrives in emptiness, in the spaces where we feel unseen or unfulfilled. It is often at its root a need in disguise, a need for intensity, for the feeling of being truly wanted, for proof that we matter to someone. Finding ways to meet that need in real, sustainable ways. That is the longer work. Sometimes that means therapy. Sometimes it means honest conversations with the people who are already in your life. Sometimes it means turning back to Allah and to yourself in ways that you've been avoiding. Sit with those uncomfortable feelings. It does not end in a single realization. There is no one moment where you wake up and it's over. It loosens gradually. The thoughts become less frequent, less urgent. They stop arriving first thing in the morning and they stop interrupting everything else. And one day, without quite noticing when, you realized you went the whole afternoon without thinking about them, and so on. Today I wanted my voiceover to be a bit different. I didn't want to talk about the painting because I noticed that I can still always be critical of myself when I paint, and it's a joke on the internet. It's two types of negative painting. The first one is talking about how to create negative space, and the second one is all the critical negative thoughts we have when we paint. So I guess I wanted to do something different by just talking about topics that I find interesting. Regarding limerence, if you've been in this feeling, you know how isolating it can be, how embarrassing even, and how strange it is to be wrecked by someone who doesn't even know the full weight of what they mean to you. But you're not alone in it. You're not dramatic, you're not broken, you're human in one of the most painful corners of human experience. And that corner, it turns out, is incredibly crowded. And I hope this gave you some language and some recognition, some small sense of being understood. And you're in it right now. Hold on, because this will lift. Try to find the time for your hobbies, your interests. Keep yourself occupied as much as you can. And I assure you that slowly you will no longer think about that person. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the painting.